The Melbourne property market seems to be showing signs of life. Let's look at whether there's been a recovery in Melbourne, and we'll look at what could be causing this. So basically, in Melbourne, clearance rates have been very high for the past few weeks. They've been in the high 70s and in one case went over 80% according to Domain. That tells us, at least at face value, that there's confidence in the market and that buyers are willing to come back in and purchase properties. But it doesn't tell us the full story. To get a full picture, what we need to look at is A, the number of properties coming to market, and B, the prices those properties are getting. If we look at the number of properties coming to market, it's steadily increasing, but it's still relatively low. Now, the steady increase tells us that vendors are becoming a little bit more confident about the prices they'll get at auction, but they're not so confident that they've flooded back into the market. So basically, it's a lukewarm positive sign. It's telling us there's a bit of a stabilization and a recovery, but it hasn't been an all-out recovery. And we're not really back at a boom period. Rather, vendors are relatively confident they can get a reasonable price, but they're not ultra confident about the market. Otherwise, they would have flooded back in. Now, if we look at prices have basically stabilized. Now, prices will fluctuate week to week, and the median price that properties are getting is going to vary a little bit. So obviously, it will change over time. However, it's been relatively constant if we look at it over the past 12 months. So if we're looking at it just throughout 2019, the price that properties are getting on auction on each weekend has fluctuated, but it's remained around 800,000. In some cases, it's been around 880,000, in some cases low 800s. But it's basically fluctuated within that band, and it's fluctuated week to week. We don't really see a strong uptick here, and we don't really see a strong upward trend. Rather, what we see is a stabilization. So what this tells us is the downturn has largely been arrested. It's now that we're in more of a stable period because prices are relatively stable. This is also bolstered by the strong clearance rates, albeit on relatively low volumes. So if we sort of summarize this, what it tells us is there's a stabilization, perhaps a slight recovery, and certainly an arrest of the decline, but it's not a strong all-out boom that we had at one period of time. So let's have a look at what could be causing this. So when we think about this, it's really the same drivers as one would have in Sydney, for example, and most of these are Australia-wide type drivers. So firstly is the continued effect of the federal election. That's obviously going to affect prices and properties for several months after the election. The reason for that is it takes time for vendors to see the election result, decide that they'll bring a property to market, then market the property, and then go to auction. So there's going to be a lag effect, and it will last for several months. So there'll be a continued effect of the federal election result, which was seen as positive for the property market because of the coalition's policies in relation to negative gearing and in relation to capital gains tax. The second positive aspect, of course, is the two RBA rate cuts, cutting rates by 50 basis points, which makes it easier for people to afford new debt and to service their existing debt. So it makes it more possible for people to afford to purchase properties. This could cause an uptick in prices going forward, or at least a stabilization of prices. Now, the final thing that is a positive here is APRA's approach to serviceability requirements. So APRA changed its serviceability requirements, whereas previously people would be assessed on whether they could pay 7% or higher on the debt that they were borrowing. Now they'll just be assessed on the interest rate plus 250 basis points. That reduction in serviceability requirements makes it easier for people to afford or show that they can afford debt to the banks, and therefore gives them access to a greater borrowing amount and or the ability to borrow just to begin with. This, to an extent, bolsters the market and helps to arrest any decline that might otherwise occur. And we can see how this is manifested in the property dynamics in relation to the stabilization of prices, the relatively healthy clearance rates, and the slight uptick in the number of properties coming to market. So those are some positive aspects. There's a few things we need to bear in mind, however, when assessing this. Firstly, we still don't have a glut of properties that have come to market. As we get further through until spring, we'll need to see what happens when more and more properties come to market. Logically, due to supply and demand, we'd either get a reduction in clearance rates or a reduction in prices. There is some research that suggests as more property comes to market, clearance rates can often keep up with that, but that really is only going to apply in a very positive market where there's very positive sentiment. If there's only lukewarm sentiment, it's not clear that that would be the case. And in fact, if buyers are perhaps a little bit reticent to purchase, if more and more properties come to market, it's not clear that that would translate into a greater clearance rate. So we'll need to see what happens going forward there. Another headwind, of course, is the global economic environment, which to some extent could put a damper on property, particularly if it relates to foreign purchases or if it relates to wage growth, i.e. if wage growth remains sluggish, that's obviously going to reduce the amount that prices can go up to, because if people can't afford to pay for higher prices, then clearly properties aren't going to sell for those. And that could be a result of things such as global factors, but also a result of things such as domestic wage growth related factors, which could put a bit of a damper on property prices going forward. So we need to see what happens in spring when more properties come to market. So basically that's what's happening in Melbourne. There's been a slight recovery in the property prices and the property market, resulting in a stabilisation of prices, resulting in a slight uptick in clearance rates, even as more properties are coming to market. But it remains to be seen what happens in spring, as there is a deluge of property that would typically occur at that point in time. So I hope the video has been interesting or useful to you. If it has, it would be great if you click the like and subscribe buttons, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.